And I'm going to start by telling a story. This is a true story, actually, supposedly, allegedly. In 172 AD, Marcus Aurelius and his legions were fighting battles across the Danube in the area of what would later become Czechoslovakia. And they got in a bit of a pickle. They actually ended up stuck in their camp, surrounded by the enemy, out of water, out of food, so they were dying of thirst. It was in the middle of summer, so they had no hope, and the enemy hordes were just about to besiege them. And so, of course, you know, they were praying to all the gods and demons and devils they could. And suddenly, the sky filled with dark clouds, and a torrential rain poured down, and the massive rain was so devastating that it was crushing and destroying the enemy. And while the Romans were holding up their shields and gathering the water and drinking it, and so their thirst was quenched by the gods from above. And if that wasn't enough, if that wasn't cool enough, balls of lightning thundered down from the sky and was annihilating the enemy and routing the enemy entirely. And so the Roman legions were victorious, and Rome was saved from the Danubian hordes. So this was a great thing, and this was part of a whole big campaign that he was fighting in the region. Obviously, he returned victorious, and he erected, as generals often did, emperors often did in this period, he erected this gigantic column. And this column is basically a comic book. It tells the story of the campaign in a spiral setup of cells all the way up the whole column. And the column survives today. It suffered some damage from pollution and acid rain and stuff, but we have pictures from before it was corroded, and you can still see some of the details even now. And the interesting thing is, we actually have in this comic book, this comic strip that spirals up this column, this miracle I just told you about is depicted there. We know about this miracle from some texts. Some authors did write about it, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. But I wanted to show you this because this is basically an artifact, a physical artifact, generated within 2 years of the event by an eyewitness who was there. And so you can't dispute it. This wasn't a copy of a copy of a copy. This is a first-hand autograph text. You know, it's a visual text of the event. And so here we have, you can see if this works. Yeah, so you got this little rain god that came and saved them. You can see his wings, so that's how you indicate that this is a god from heaven coming to save you. And the rain is pouring down, and you can see in this cell over here, the rain is pouring into the Roman shields. They're holding up the shields and drinking from them, and the rain is coming down and just crushing and destroying the enemy over here. And further on, up the thing, a few cells beyond, it also shows lightning bolts coming down and destroying the siege works of the enemy and so on. So this is pretty good evidence of this amazing miracle, isn't it? The Christians wish they had that kind of evidence. So this is the sequence of events. We had this miraculous battle in 172 AD, and then in 174 the column was completed. You know, it took a long time to make a really beautiful, complicated piece of architecture like that. And the first stories, the first tales that survive for us to know of them, begin with Christians. The Christian apologist Apollinarius in 180 AD, and that's just 8 years after the event. And then shortly after him, about 25 years after the event, Tertullian, a more infamous Christian apologist, wrote his account of this miracle. The first time we hear the pagan version of it is 50 years after the account, so that's about the same distance between the crucifixion and the Gospels, from Cassius Dio. So let's talk about these accounts. We're going to start with the Christian version. What did the Christians tell? Now, this is the first accounts that we have, the earliest accounts, within just years. This is their story. Their story is that Marcus Aurelius had an entire legion of Christians, and that their prayers to Christ alone saved them. It was just because they prayed to Christ and that they were saved, and it saved the empire. And that Marcus Aurelius honored the Christian legion for this by officially renaming it the Thundering Legion. That's the Christian version. The pagan version, Marcus Aurelius had an Egyptian sorcerer with him named Harnuphus. His spell, summoning the god Hermes, messenger of Zeus, brought the miracle, and there's no mention of Christians. In fact, the idea of a Christian legion under Marcus Aurelius is absurd on multiple levels. One of the things, at this time, Marcus Aurelius considered Christians to be disloyal to the empire because they wouldn't do the ancient equivalent of the Pledge of Allegiance, essentially, which was honor obeisance to the statue that represented the guardian spirit who protected the emperor. And that was your way of saying that I support the emperor by praying to his guardian spirit. But they wouldn't do that, and so he interpreted that as being basically traitors to the empire. So And also, if you were part of the legions, you had to give prayers and certain things and certain ritual cult paid to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, whom I'll introduce you to in a moment. And these are things that Christians couldn't do. So you couldn't have, Marcus Aurelius would never have Christians in his legions, and the idea of him having an entire legion full of them is absurd on multiple levels. So the story, the Christian story is a little bogus. The pagan story sounds weirder then. So which one is true? Where is the truth in all of this? First of all, you might wonder, what is an Egyptian sorcerer doing summoning Hermes, the Greek god? So a little brief lesson in how pagans understood their world. They didn't think that Hermes was different from Thoth. The idea was that everybody was worshiping the same gods just under different names. And so you spoke a different language, you used a different word for your god. And many of the gods had multiple names. So the pagans had no trouble with the idea of thinking that the Greek god Hermes was really just the Egyptian god Thoth, and the Egyptians thought the same thing back and forth. Just in the same way that the Roman god Mercury was just considered to be the Roman version of Hermes, they all thought it was the same god. You're just using different rituals and using different names for them. And again, Hermes is the messenger of Zeus, but Zeus was equated to the Egyptian god of Ra, and the Roman version was Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter best and greatest. And that was the chief god of the Roman Empire and of the Roman legions. Now the interesting thing is, right within the period of this war, and right in the area of what would later become Czechoslovakia, we recovered a temple that was dedicated by the emperor to Jupiter Optimus Maximus Cassius, which is the name of the sort of local deity there. But the iconography shows that this is a representation of Jupiter or Zeus as the thunderbolter. This is the Zeus thunderbolter. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the thrower of thunderbolts. Now it's kind of interesting that we have the emperor dedicating a temple to Zeus thunderbolter right at the exact time that we hear that there was a miracle in which thunderbolts saved the legions. So we have some physical evidence supporting, corroborating that part of the story. We also have, interestingly enough, in the same region, from the same time, an inscription dedicated to the goddess Isis by two people, Harnufus, the sacred scribe from Egypt, and Terentius Priscus, probably a Roman legionnaire, who dedicated it to the appearing goddess, the goddess who appears and manifests herself, and that's an epithet of the goddess Isis. So here we have a Harnufus, an Egyptian sorcerer, as he's identified as a sacred scribe, with the legions in that time, in that place. And that, what are the odds of that? So this does look like we actually had a Harnufus with the legions. So the pagan story is starting to look a little better. Now, another thing that happened, right after the war, as soon as he got back, as soon as he returned from these campaigns, he Marcus Aurelius instituted coins. He started coining some special currency honoring something. I can guess and infer what. But the legend on the coin was Religio Augusti, which means the religion of the emperor. And it depicts on one side the bust of Marcus Aurelius, and on this side that I'm showing a drawing of, Hermes standing in an Egyptian temple. So what are the odds that the emperor would suddenly start striking coins honoring Hermes in an Egyptian temple as his religion? Not only did he do it immediately after returning, but the coin issue stopped as soon as the column was dedicated. So it was issued from the December of 172 AD until 174. So here we have more physical evidence corroborating the pagan account. Now let's top that off with one more interesting thing. You know how the Christians said that he renamed the legion the Thundering Legion because of this great miracle that they did? Well, it turns out, funny story, over 100 years earlier, we know that this legion was already called the Thundering Legion. And this is another inscription from Egypt, incidentally, from Thebes, Egypt. Another inscription by some officers and NCOs of the 12th Legion, that was the legion responsible. And it says right there, the 12th Legion called Fulminati, the Thundering Legion. And they date it. The inscription was made in the 11th year of Nero, which is 64 AD. So we know this legion had already been called the Thundering Legion for ages and ages before this miracle occurred. So strike one there for the Christian account. So every aspect of the Christian story is refuted by the evidence. Every aspect of the pagan version is confirmed in the evidence. Yet the Christian legend arose within just a few years, not decades, a few years, and it prevailed. In the Western Middle Ages, the pagan version was forgotten entirely. The only version that was known in the Western European area was the Christian version. It completely eclipsed and won out. And the only reason we know about the pagan version of this is because one dude in the Eastern Byzantine Empire preserved one pagan historian who just happened to mention it. And just that one text. And so we only found that out when those texts started creeping west. after the Renaissance. So, that's an interesting piece of facts there that you can use to compare with the way Christians talk about things. Now, what can we take away from this? Well, Christians were big-ass liars, yeah.